Hi guys, I'm back again today with another video, and today we're checking out facts about Germans never taught in school. What does that mean? But anyways, we're gonna find out. So before we start, don't forget to subscribe, click the bell button, and let's see. Oh, okay.
Germans are an old people. Their language is centuries older than English, French, Spanish, or Italian. But the history of a dozen years has cast a long shadow over the thousands of years of their existence as a people. The rule of Hitler and the Nazis from 1933 to 1945 not only sealed the fate of the Germans of that generation, it has colored the way Germans have been seen since then, as well as the way the previous history of Germans has been seen. German intellectual figures, social traditions, and political movements in centuries past that were once seen in the context of their own times are now often seen as precursors of Nazi totalitarianism or of the Holocaust. Was all of German history leading up to Hitler? Or were the Nazi years simply a tragic aberration on a monumental scale? The collectivization of Germans in the minds of others has had major consequences in the real world, quite aside from its impact on intellectual conceptions of this people. At the end of the Second World War, millions of people of German ancestry living outside the Reich in various parts of Eastern Europe and the Balkans were sent back to Germany, even though many of these families had been living where they were for centuries, and many of the individuals sent back to Germany had in fact never seen Germany. Winston Churchill protested these mass expulsions of millions of Germans on a scale grievous and undreamed of, and said, "We must banish revenge against an entire race from our minds." In order to assess the 12 fateful years of the Nazi regime and its relationship to German culture and history in general, we must first review that history and that culture. Germans, as a people, have extended well beyond the boundaries of present-day Germany, not only in Europe, but in overseas settlements in the Western Hemisphere and as far away as Australia. The extent to which these far-flung settlements could be considered German, and for how long, depends of course on the extent to which German culture persisted among them, and whether or not that culture was linked to the German nation-state. To assess that,
Okay, I get it now. I get what we're doing. Yeah, there's so many things that I question. Also, is like, is this from Germany? And nobody told us. So maybe this will answer a lot of our questions. So I'm excited.
we need to see, at least in outline, some of the prominent features of the culture and values historically associated with Germans. Moreover, the features of German culture stand out in sharper relief against the cultures of the surrounding peoples, such as the Slavs of Eastern Europe or the British and French to the west. Long before German societies became industrialized, Germans were skilled craftsmen in many fields. Germans were known for brewing beer in Roman times, and Germany today produces more beer than any other country in Europe. People of German ancestry have set up breweries as far away as Australia and China, the famous Tsingtao beer of China having been created by Germans there. The
No way. Because there's a lot of like people who drink, right? Who always rave about the fact that that is like one of the best beers that they've had. They always say that is the best beer. Or if it comes to like Asia, like they ask, okay, what is the best beer you've had in Asia? It's not going to be like a Japanese beer. It's not gonna be like, I don't even know if Korea does beer, but it's not. I mean, sometimes we are low key there also Philippines, but the most that people rave about is that brand of beer from China. Crazy, crazy, and
leading
it's
American
made in
brands of
Germany.
beer, Budweiser,
I
Coors,
mean,
and Miller, were likewise all created by people of German ancestry.
yep.
German breweries in Buenos Aires drove English beer out of the market
Ting sa
there.
ting
In the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo, the only
ting
producers
tao.
of beer in the early 20th century were Germans. Beer brewing Germans are not simply a stereotype. German craftsmen also pioneered in making pianos and took this skill with them to other countries. The first pianos in colonial America were built by Germans, who also led the way in building pianos in Australia, Russia, France, and England. German craftsmanship also created optical products that made such firms as Zeiss, Schneider, Rodenstock, and Voigtlander world leaders in high-quality lens production. The leading lens-making firm in the United States was founded by two German immigrants named Bausch and Lomb. Printing was another area in which Germans led the way. Gutenberg introduced printing with movable type in Europe, and centuries later, Germans set up the first printing press in the Western Hemisphere. When printing presses began to spread from Western Europe into Eastern Europe, they spread first into German enclaves in the East, because here were concentrated people who could read. Germans also pioneered in map making. The name America was given to the Western Hemisphere by a German map maker. Mining was another area in which Germans became renowned as far back as the 16th century. Copper mines in Britain were opened up by Germans, as were silver mines in Mexico, Spain, and Norway, in addition to the German mining communities in the Balkans already noted. German craftsmanship in metal created the first armor and swords manufactured in Mexico, as well as the renowned Kentucky rifle, which was in fact made by Germans in Pennsylvania. For thousands of years, Germans excelled in military operations. German generals held positions of high command in the Roman legions, as they would in later centuries command armies in Tsarist Russia, in South America, and in the United States from the Revolutionary War of 1776 to the two world wars of the 20th century, in both of which the U.S. Army was commanded by generals of German ancestry, Pershing and Eisenhower, respectively. German commanders of American military forces in the Second World War also included Admiral Chester Nimitz, who commanded the Pacific Fleet, and General Karl Spaatz, whose bombers reduced much of Germany to rubble. In both world wars, the armies of Germany inflicted far more casualties on opposing forces than the Germans sustained themselves. During the Middle Ages, the Teutonic Knights conquered Prussia, which became the heartland of German military prowess for centuries to come. German fighting men were in demand by rulers in Eastern Europe and in the Ottoman Empire, and were used by the British in their attempt to suppress the rebellious American colonies, as well as by the Americans in order to bring their citizen army up to the military standards required to fight the British. Ironically, Germans produced not only leading military men, but also leading pacifist groups, such as the Menonites, who also spread to other countries. Whether in agriculture, industry, commerce, or the military, Germans became known for thoroughness, organization, punctuality, and hard work, as well as for specific skills. Other countries not only welcomed German immigrants, but some actively recruited them, and in some cases subsidized their travel. Not only in Eastern Europe, but also in developing nations in the Western Hemisphere and in Australia, Germans were recruited to pioneer in opening up undeveloped wilderness. Wherever Germans settled around the world, there were newspapers printed in German. In Russia, the St. Petersburger Zeitung was founded in 1727, followed in later years by the Saratov Deutsche Zeitung in the German agricultural settlements on the Volga, and the Odesser Zeitung among Germans who settled by the Black Sea. In the United States during the immigrant era, most of the foreign language newspapers in the country were German. St. Louis had two daily newspapers in German as early as 1845, and out on the plains, there was an Odessa Zeitung set up by German immigrants from Russia who had kept their language and culture intact after
Now I'm more curious. What is a zeitung? Because it's everywhere. I mean, it's in the title. Is it news or library? Let me know. Well, it's one of those, right? Or article. I don't know.
settling in Russia for generations and then resettling in the United States. German-language newspapers were published daily in 15 American cities, with such names as Die New Yorker Staatszeitung, the Cincinnati Volksblatt, the Chicago Abendpost, the Louisville Anzeiger, and the Deutsche Zeitung in New Orleans. In Brazil, there was the Santa Cruz Anzeiger, the Deutsche Zeitung, and the Brazil Post. Elsewhere in South America, there were the Argentinisches Tagblatt, and the Deutsche Zeitung for Paraguay, among others. In the Australian city of Adelaide, the Australische Zeitung was still being published in the late 20th century. These German-language newspapers in countries around the world were just one indication of the persistence of German culture among people settled for generations, or even centuries, in other countries. German settlers in Australia built houses and communities in the style that they had been used to in their homeland. A German traveler in 19th century Australia wrote of an immigrant settlement there. There are German public houses, a German drugstore, German doctors, stores, blacksmith, carpenter, school, church. In fact, everything is German. The traveler would believe himself in some little village of the old country between the Rhine and the Oder. A rural village in Argentina was described this way by a visitor in 1967. I entered the church and heard something I did not remotely expect in this distant place. Traditional German hymns of Holy Week, sung in typical Volga German style in which each voice remains distinct. I looked around. Men, women, and children were in their Sunday dress. Some of the women wore scarves. Beneath them were faces like those of the country people in Germany. In front of the nave, the minister was preaching in common German to the parishioners. It was difficult to believe that I was in Latin America, that the ancestors of these people had left Germany for Russia 200 years ago. This cultural persistence among Germans around the world represented a loyalty to the particular subculture of the locality from which they had come, not a political loyalty to the German nation. Many had, in fact, immigrated before there was a German nation created in 1871. A 19th century German community in Australia was described as the recreation of a Silesian village. In the United States as well, Germans from particular localities settled together and maintained the culture of that area. Frankfort, Kentucky, was founded by Germans from Frankfurt, Germany, and Grand Island, Nebraska, by Schleswig-Holsteiners. Lomira, Wisconsin, was settled almost exclusively by Prussians from Brandenburg, while the nearby towns of Hermann and Theresa were settled by Pomeranians. Even among Germans who immigrated from Russia to the United States, those who came from the Volga settlements established their own communities in the Plain States, distinct from the communities in those states established by those Germans who came from the Black Sea settlements. Even when they resettled again in California, the Volga Germans and the Black Sea Germans settled separately, the former around Lodi and the latter around Fresno. How long and to what extent the Germans remained culturally separate varied with circumstances. Rural enclaves tended to remain culturally insular longer and more completely than was the case when Germans settled in urban communities that included people of other nationalities and cultures. Where the Germans were the numerically predominant urban group, as they were for centuries in much of Eastern Europe, they could assimilate the local population, or at least its upwardly mobile elements, to the German culture. But where the Germans were greatly outnumbered, and especially where the great majority of the German immigrants were male, then interactions among groups, including intermarriage, eroded the German culture. This was the case in much of 19th century Australia, but not in South Australia, where whole families of Germans tended to settle together, and there were as many women as men, so that these communities could maintain their separate social and cultural identities.
This is like a audiobook, right? Maybe he voices some audiobooks because I feel like I've heard this voice before in a book that I listened to because I don't read. Um I feel like is his name Thomas Sowell? I don't know. Let's see.
Women as men, so that these communities could maintain their separate social and cultural identities for generations. It was much the same story in Brazil, where there was very little intermarriage with members of the local population living near German agricultural communities well into the 20th century, while in cities.
The reason I'm shocked is I feel like the Aruki, they are literally telling you facts or history, and you're like, I feel like it's true. That's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, I feel like it's true. The reason why I feel like this part is true, I mean, it is a historical fact that he's stating, but the reason why I believe it is because I have a friend who lived there, but they're Germans. It's so weird. Like you would never think that you will find Germans in like Brazil or South America or something, right? I mean, you can find people everywhere if you look, but you wouldn't think that there's a large community or population of Germans in that side of the world. Maybe you will think somewhere in Europe, England is Europe, I know, guys, but in my because of Brexit, I just removed uh, the whole entire UK from Europe, okay? So sue me. Because I did make the mistake of saying like, "Oh, Europe and UK." I know they're eh, geographically, but in my brain it's not okay. Anyways, going back. Yeah, it's shocking. So, like, there is this German girl. I mean, she's half also, but still, there's this German girl who speaks Spanish, and I'm like, I'm not saying you can't speak Spanish, but you sound more Portuguese, I should say, than like you sound more Portuguese than you sound German. Hmm. But anyways, it's fascinating. So the fact that he's like saying this, I'm like, yeah, this is so true.
And in some rural areas where there were more diverse populations, acculturation and assimilation became more common. Yet, even living in cities with large numbers of people from other backgrounds did not automatically lead to rapid assimilation. In New York City, where 90% of the population was non German, in the early 20th century, most people of German ancestry nevertheless married other people of German ancestry. That changed
Mm.
over the years, but not immediately or rapidly. This cultural cohesiveness was seldom accompanied by political cohesiveness or group identity politics. Germans were usually not very politically active in any case, and they tended to be underrepresented among career politicians. Where German political leaders arose in other countries, it was seldom as representatives of ethnic Germans in those countries. In the United States, for example, those people of German ancestry who did achieve prominence in politics, the Muhlenbergs in the 18th century, Karl Schurz and John Peter Altgeld in the 19th, and Herbert Hoover and Dwight D. Eisenhower in the 20th century, did so as representatives of the American people at large, rather than as
Mm.
spokesmen for ethnic German interests. There were similar patterns in other countries. In Australia, Germans tended to be underrepresented in politics, and those Germans who achieved political office were elected from constituencies where there were few Germans, as well as from constituencies where Germans were the predominant population. In Russia, the presence of Baltic Germans in high positions in the Tsarist government was of no benefit to the Volga Germans or the Black Sea Germans, in whom these German officials took no interest and whom they looked down on as peasants. In Brazil, Germans long remained politically apathetic until after the Second World War, when they began to elect more deputies. However, in places where the German minority was under sustained political attack, such as by the Latvians or the Czechs, Germans were provoked into political activity. The persistence of German culture did not, in most cases, mean making public dramatizations of a separate identity, exceptions again being in places like Czechoslovakia. More commonly, Germans maintained their culture without making a public issue of it. In the
Mm.
United States, such American sports icons as Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig grew up speaking German, and so did Nobel Prize-winning economist George Stigler.
Oh, okay. I see. The colonial and post-colonial history of Ghana. Ooh, that's something I want to know. I This is Kofi Annan. This is I forget his name. He passed away not recently, but kind of recently because I remember. I think I was really really young when he was the president, and I was there also when he was the president. This guy. I think I think so. Maybe I don't remember. But anyways, yeah, I was in Ghana during that time. I know this about Germany, but I just saw it pop out, so I just wanted to say. Maybe I'll watch on my own time. But anyways, um, yeah, that is so fascinating, and I do get the title now. Never thought in school. Very facts. Um, obviously. or maybe not obviously. There's only one main thing that I remember from history, like world history, when it comes to Germany. There's only one thing, and we all know what that one thing is. That they teach us in history. They never teach us anything else, right? They never give us any more input or to German, to Germany, which is crazy. Crazy. There's so much to learn. Like history class to me is Philippine history and world history. That's it, full stop. And world history mostly is about America because America is the world, I guess. Um, it's all about America, American history. To be honest, I don't remember anything else significant than the part of Germany slash Poland that we discussed. Um, yeah, that's basically all I remember. So hearing this is has like kind of like broadened my little knowledge of Germany. And obviously, my German class, we didn't go in depth to German history. We are talking about Guten Morgen, right? We didn't go like in depth about the history. Like when you learn a language, especially for a semester, they don't go into history also of the country, which is sad. I feel like we should actually. Like maybe the first week should be the history, like a brief summary of a history, and then we start learning the language, right? But anyways, that is nice. If you want me to check out other countries, I would love to. I mean, I think tonight I'm gonna be watching Ghana, so that's that. Well, thank you guys for joining, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.